Well, hello everyone, and welcome again to Painless Universal Conversation with myself and Welsh. Today we'll be talking about bipolar pain and depression. Many people might be going through this, are currently going through this, have been diagnosed with bipolar pain, but not quite sure how to deal with this challenge and find their joy. My guest today will be telling you about his own journey, how he was diagnosed with bipolar pain, what this meant to him, and how he's managed to find his joy along the way. And is now married. He's been married for many years and been able to maintain a relationship with his wife. I guess Oliver Seligman. He's a mental wellness coach and an inspirational speaker. He's an Isha monk and a meditational teacher since 2003. He's author of two books, one called Befriending Bipolar, A Patient Perspective, and The Broker Who Broke Free. His story and his journey started in 1993 at the tender age of 17. He found himself in a mental health hospital in Edinburgh in the throes of a horrific depression. He was then diagnosed with bipolar disorder, but did his very best to get on with life and not let the illness drag him down. He became a sales trader on the #1 equity trading desk in the world. It was all too much for him. He started stressing out, he got bored, he got anxious, and he quit the job to find other things, to find more ways of finding his joy. This conversation today is really about how do we deal with being diagnosed with a chronic illness? How do we find our joy? How do we overcome depression, mental health problem, anxiety to find our joy again? Well, meet my amazing guest, Oliver, as he shares his story and hopefully inspires you to find your joy in whatever you do. Meet Oliver. Well, hello everyone, and welcome again to Painless Universal Conversation with myself and Welsh. As I said in my introduction, today we're talking about bipolar pain and depression. So many of you might have gone through this, might be going through it, and not knowing that you are actually going through this pain. My guest, Oliver, will be telling you about his own journey, how he's managed to overcome this pain, and what you can do to find your joy again. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. It's lovely to be here.
Oh, actually, I'm really delighted because I mean, you are openly talking about a powerful story of living with bipolar disorder and depression. And you talk openly about having spent time in mental hospitals across the globe. You finally learn to stop fighting the illness and learn to accept it. This is amazing. I mean, this is what I keep telling people that if you could just learn to stop fighting what you have and learn to accept it and live with it, it always make a huge difference. But before we get into all of that, who are you?
Well, I'm 46 years old, Scottish guy, been living in Norway for almost 20 years, married, enjoying life, I would say. Yeah.
Oh, wow. So when you look at your background growing up, what was your childhood like? Because it was important to understand people's childhood. What was yours like?
I think my childhood was pretty good. I
Yeah.
lived in the north of Scotland with a brother and sister and parents, and it was one of those childhoods that was very free. There were no real dangers around, and we could cycle wherever we wanted and climb trees, and we spent most of our time outdoors just playing in nature. So yeah, I think in many ways I was very blessed.
And as a teenager, I mean, when did you start noticing that there was something slightly different from you from the rest of the other people? When did you notice this bipolar?
Well, I think I really started to notice it when I was about 17, and my mind started to get faster, and I started to think really, really amazing things about myself. I thought that I was a complete genius. I had my A-level exams coming up and I didn't do any revision because why would I bother? I'm a genius. And I got more and more sort of enamored with myself, and I had all these grand ideas and things I was going to do with my life, and they became more and more unrealistic. And then I came back from the holidays before my A levels. And all of a sudden, I realized I hadn't even opened a textbook, hadn't done any revision, and it was like a week to the exams. And I was like, this is not good. And so what had been a very pleasant kind of hypermanic experience where just life just got more and more rosy and more kind of wonderful, it suddenly crashed into this kind of paranoia and my mind racing at 100 miles an hour with negative thoughts and trying to revise and trying to hold myself together whilst my whole kind of inner world was collapsing, and I was terrified of everything, and I was quite aggressive, and I wasn't myself at all. So that was really the first time I realized there's something wrong here.
Yes. I have to ask this question because I've heard bipolar. I've heard people talk about it. But to tell you I know what bipolar is, I'm not quite sure. Could you just describe it in words that people would understand? What is bipolar?
Yeah, from my point of view, bipolar is it's a huge exaggeration of the ups and downs that most people experience emotionally. And so, for example, someone with bipolar, they would it obviously is very common for a sort of mentally healthy person to feel sad sometimes, or even to feel really sad, if a loved one dies. Whereas someone with bipolar can go down into depression that is so deep that they want to kill themselves, and they can't even feed themselves or get out of bed or have any concept that they would at any point recover. So it's like a massive exaggeration. And then on the other hand, people with bipolar, they usually have a thing called mania as well. And mania it's a very sort of high experience. And in my book, I talk about two types of mania. I don't know if they're officially recognized, but I talk about agitated manias and euphoric manias. And euphoric mania, for me, is the most incredible feeling I've ever had in my life. It's like living in heaven. It's just like you have these waves of bliss, and you think you can do anything, and everyone sort of listens to you and loves you. And it's like walking around sort of thinking of Jesus, and you have these amazing sort of powers and abilities. But then they very rarely last because they're obviously completely ungrounded experiences. And they, for me anyway, always became agitated mania, which was much more paranoia, intense thoughts all the time, being very, very sad and uptight about the world, but going at a million miles an hour. So you can never really rest. So bipolar, it's a very simplified explanation, but is usually people have those two experiences or something fairly close to them.
Mm.
And they can also have in a bipolar called bipolar type 1, which is what I have, you can also have psychoses. And a psychosis, is, I'm sure a lot of your listeners know, is a situation where you're detached from reality. So, for example, I had one psychosis where I was put in a mental hospital, and I thought that I'd been arrested for raping a young girl, and I was being put in a prison, but they were pretending it was a mental hospital to try and get evidence from me. So when the doctors and nurses came to talk to me, I wouldn't say anything because I thought they were undercover police. So it can be pretty wild. Yeah.
Wow, this is unbelievable. If someone has a kid right now and that child is going through bipolar, what are some of the symptoms to notice that there is something unusual about this person?
Well, I'm not trained in sort of treating bipolar or anything, so I can just kind of talk from my own experience and what other people have told me. But really, I think for most people with bipolar, I think we would all say that there's a lot of anxiety involved in it. And the depression is also often really noticeable, because if you can't get out of bed, or if you want to take your own life, then that's a really easy thing for parents to see. The manias, and there's also a thing called hypermania, which is not quite as high as mania. Mania is kind of up here and hypermania is kind of here. Those are in some ways harder to spot because they can build up over a really long period of time, and they can just seem like someone's personality. So, for example, I was hypermanic for a few years when I was at university, and I was just like the life and soul of the party. I took a lot of risks. I slept around a lot, which obviously a lot of people do that at university, but for me it was compulsive, the whole thing. I basically could be very, very fun and alive and always telling jokes, and then the next minute I could be really mean to people and really cruel. And although these were aspects of my personality. I mean, they're aspects of anyone's personality. It's like they were just exaggerated, and they got kind of worse and worse and worse, and ended up with me just not being able to sleep and then crashing.
I have then you started receiving prescribed medicine for your depression and your bipolar disorder. What were the effects of this on your everyday life from these medicine you were taking?
Yeah, it's really I really enjoy talking about medication, because in mental illness it's a pretty emotional topic for a lot of people. You know, a lot of people do not like the side effects that they get. A lot of people don't like the effects that the medication gives them. And then for some people it's a lifesaver. So it's a very kind of emotional area. And my approach to medication is I look on it in a very individual way. It's all about trying to find what works for me or for the individual. And sometimes that will be medication, and for other people it won't be. You know, medication will make them worse sometimes. Um, the first sort of hardcore medication I went on was called lithium. And I'd been ill for about a year and a half on and off, with being in a mental hospital with mania and then having depressions. And so my psychiatrist kind of suggested lithium to me, but he'd been quite wary about it, because once you start a drug like lithium, at least back then, the belief was, well, you might have to stay on it for the rest of your life, which is a pretty hardcore thing to do when you're 18 or whatever.
Yeah.
So I was so desperate to be happy, I jumped at the chance. I didn't Google lithium. I don't think we even had Google back then, but I didn't read anything. I was just so desperate to be well. I said, I'll try anything. And I tried lithium, and to its credit, it helped me enormously. In the 20 years that I took it on a pretty high dose, I didn't have any depressions, and I didn't have any manias, and I had quite a lot of hypermania, but I survived. You know, it was okay. I'm not even sure that anyone even realized I had sort of hypermania until afterwards. The real disadvantage with lithium for me, and this doesn't happen for everyone, but for me, was it really shut down my emotional life. I'd always been quite an emotional person, and I'd had this like I'm sure particularly as a woman who are very in touch with their emotions generally.
Yes.
Yeah, you have like an emotional compass, and
Yeah.
it's like your lifeline.
Yes, and you can relate to people that way. You can
Yeah,
feel what people are feeling, and you could just then you know how to react to people whenever they do
yeah,
things.
absolutely. So it's the way you navigate through the world, and it was the same for me. But suddenly that disappeared, and I couldn't really feel anything. And I would occasionally feel things. If a friend died, I couldn't cry, but would feel something. I kind of knew I was meant to be sad. If I was with people I loved, I knew I was meant to love them. Like I knew intellectually what should be happening, but none of it happened. Couldn't feel a thing. And that was extremely confusing. And it was really bad for my relationships.
Mm.
Yeah, really bad for them. Mm.
What fascinates me about yourself, Oliver, is the fact that you became an equity trader. So I mean, that is such a high pressure job to do and expose yourself to one of the most stress-filled jobs on the planet. You went into that. As someone who's bipolar, how were you able to tackle that?
Not very well. It's,
Yeah, I'm wondering that. How did you do this? Why did
yeah,
you decide to go into this field?
yeah. I actually read something that said that a lot of people with bipolar, because they have this sort of this manic intensity, some of us, even when we're well, we can have that just in us, that they're often we're often attracted to jobs that are completely inappropriate, because we want the buzz, we want the aliveness, or perhaps we have very unrealistic expectations for ourselves. I know for me, I always felt I had to be a success. I had this like pressure inside me and this sort of perfectionism. And I just thought, God, if I can be a trader, I can make loads of money. I can buy a place on the beach in Thailand and find peace. And alongside that very sort of noble desire was also this big ego saying, I want to be special. I want to be important. I want people to look up to me, you know?
Mm.
So it didn't go well. And I ended up sort of hating the job and not really being that good at it. And after I think about 3 years, I eventually quit.
This is where the monk came into place because what is your primary reason for joining in the mysterious monk? Because that is something that I was like, is doing all kinds of things that are very, very different. What was that? What was your primary reason for joining, and what were the benefits of it?
Well, I think one of the good things that came from bipolar was it really focused me on wanting to be happy and wanting to find peace,
Mm.
because I was just so far away from it. Even when I was stabilized, I was never at peace. I found it so hard to relax. And so I quit my job at Merrill Lynch at the bank. And I felt great for about 6 weeks. I felt this incredible sort of relief. And then this terrible thing happened, because after about 6 weeks, my mind started kind of crawling back, and the normal worries and stresses and feeling a lack of purpose returned, and confusion, not knowing what I'm going to do with my life. And I suddenly realized, well, apart from having less stress, I'm no happier than I was in the bank. And that shocked me. And so I went for a walk on Wimbledon Common, listening to my Discman, as it was back then, Sony Discman,
Yeah.
and like a little sort of, Walkman thing, and listening to Westlife, who I have to say, I just love Westlife. I think they're it's great.
I
So I'm
love it.
listening to Westlife.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's so cheesy. I think it's great.
It's very
And
song, so it makes one, and it doesn't matter what you're going through, it just gives you this buzz of happiness. So it's not,
yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. So I'm listening to Queen of My Heart or whatever, and I'm crying to myself, just thinking, what am I going to do? I don't know how to do life. It was like the first time in my life I'd realized that I just didn't get it. I
Hmm.
didn't get life. I didn't understand it. And for most of my life before then, I kind of been pretending I got it, which, I think a lot of us do that when we're younger. We kind of think we got it made.
But eventually, so how did you get into the monk area? What happened?
Well, I basically prayed when I was walking, says, please God, just help me, show me what I'm meant to do.
Hmm.
And a few days later, I was getting a shiatsu massage, and this guy told me all about this meditation. And I completely ignored him, thought meditation was really boring. And then I had 4 sort of brushes with death in the next 4 or 5 months. And after the final one, I just thought, I gotta learn to meditate. I gotta try and create some peace in my life.
Yeah.
And monks taught me, and then I became a monk.
Because you really became one, and you started teaching people about the way the monks live and teaching about coping with life. Can you tell us some of the key principles you learned as a monk? Because if some, for myself, I've never gone that route, but what are some of the things you learned and your teaching methods?
Well, the whole principle for being an Ishaya monk, that's what I am. It's not a religious monk.
Yeah.
It's a monk who's dedicated to experiencing more peace and joy and helping other people find that if they want to. So anyone can be involved in it. It doesn't matter what religion you are, if you're no religion or anything like that. But the fundamental principle of it is really simple. It's that we suffer when we are thinking about things. When we're thinking and thinking and thinking, that's when we suffer emotionally. And when we can learn to be still in ourselves, or learn to be present, that's really the word that most people use these days, um, then we start to escape from that suffering. It's not that we push the suffering away. It's not that we sort of deny the suffering, but we break the habit of constantly going over things and worrying and stressing and thinking about problems that often never happen.
Yes.
I think it was Mark Twain said, I've had 1,000 problems in my life and most of them have never happened.
Wow.
And so that's what it's based on. It's based on learning to be present. And the more present you become, the more you grow as a human being, the less you worry, the less you suffer. And then at some point you're at peace and you're just happy most of the time, maybe all the time, who knows?
However, I have to, how were you able to find your joy from doing this, finding the monk, the teachings of the monk? How were you able to find your own joy?
Well, when I sort of learned to ascend, which is the meditation I do, there were a lot of very nice people around. There are a lot of nice people in the group. So that was a big help for me because I'm sociable. But I think what's really happened is that by letting go of my worries and letting go of overthinking life, just my kind of natural joy is just coming out more and more. And as long as I'm balanced on medication, then I'm really happy. I have my moments, but I'm far happier than most people would expect me to be, particularly with bipolar, and far more peaceful. And so for me, it's been this strange journey where I've had this mental illness that when I'm mentally ill, the meditation doesn't touch it. It's like it's gone. It doesn't do anything. But also when I'm stable on medication, then I can use the meditation to become much more peaceful and happier and more grounded. So it's been a strange journey for me. It's not like a typical kind of meditation waking up journey.
Okay. And is it possible, because now you found this and you have this bipolar, how were you able to, because bipolar is all about this emotion circle where one minute you're very, very happy, or your emotions all over the place, or the other minute you're very, very sad. But when you look back at your life in terms of now who you are today, I see you, I'm talking to you, you seem very composed, you seem very ready to, you've accepted this bipolar, you've accepted who you are, you've accepted the depression. The pandemic caused so much pain to so many people. When you look back at your life, how did you tell bipolar it is enough? I need to now focus on me. Depression, it is enough. I need to now find me. I need to find my own joy. What were the tools? What were the points? What did you do to say goodbye? Was there someone who led you on this path? I know you said the monk, but was there anything in particular where you were able to make peace with bipolar?
Well, strangely enough, it was actually a combination of suffering so much and learning to be a bit wiser through meditation and also through suffering. So I got to this stage about, I think, gosh, about 10 years ago, 10 or 11 years ago, where a lot of people around me were telling me that, lithium, it's a very toxic drug and you really need to try alternative medicine and blah, blah, blah. And I sort of bought into this, and I had a 4-year period where I was coming off lithium, and then I was off lithium, and then I tried other medication, and it was hellish. I was in and out of hospitals. I was really depressed. I was in psychoses, living in other universes. It was a terrible experience for me and also for my family. And I got to the end of it, and I suddenly realized I'm fighting reality. The reality is I need psychiatric medication. It's not pretty. I don't like the side effects at all, but I actually need this. This is part of my journey on earth. And it was almost like overnight, I kind of grew up, and I just suddenly realized I have to start taking responsibility for this. And before then, I don't think I'd really ever taken responsibility for bipolar. I'd taken my medication, and that was about it. And so I started reading about it, and I got stable again on a lower dose of lithium, which was great because the side effects were not as bad. Um, and it was amazing. I don't know. I'm sure it's happened to you. I mean, I know you're a mum and everything, but there are certain times in your life where you realize something and you look back and think, why was I doing that? Was I totally gone? And that's what it's like for me. And so fortunately, I had such a hard time that it was like my suffering woke me up, and I realized I have to accept this. I want to accept this because actually it's a part of me. Bipolar can't be, no one can separate bipolar from a mind or a body. Like it's kind of all there. And it's hard for a lot of people, even with bipolar, to know what is bipolar and what is me, personality wise. We don't really know. So I just had to just almost decide to myself, right, I'm accepting this. This is absolutely fine. But the most important thing is that I'm happy. Forget trying to come off medication, forget, you know, trying to live longer, because, for a lot of people, if they're on meds, it does shorten their lifespan. And I was worried about that. And it's just like, well, I'd rather enjoy life now than live another 15 years. So it was a cool experience, but it was bloody hard work.
I'm so glad you did that, because if you did go through that process, you won't be where you are today. This when finally making that decision. I think this led you to your book. You're an author. You've written the book Befriending Bipolar: A Patient's Perspective. Can you tell us a little bit about your book? Anyone who wants to get a copy of your book, where can they also get that copy?
Well, I'm very biased, but I think it's a great book.
Of course it is.
No, I actually, it is a great book, and part of that reason is because I got a lot of help with it. I got a lot of help from my wife, and I have 3 amazing friends who proofread it and gave feedback, and they're all very bright people, so that helped a lot. But basically, it's a book that I like writing novels. I like writing exciting books and sort of edgy books, that people actually really want to read. And so I wanted Befriending Bipolar to be like that. I didn't want it to just be a sort of boring, sort of intellectual textbook. This is bipolar and this is what you do. And so, the first sort of the prologue starts with me just fantasizing that I'm the Messiah and seeing these aliens coming for me, whilst I'm floating 30 feet in the air. And in many ways that sets the tone. But also the way I've written it is that hopefully anyway, there's quite a lot of exciting stories within it, but there's also quite a lot of reflection and explaining what was happening in a way that, from what the feedback I've got, a lot of people can relate to. Whether you have bipolar or whether you know someone with a mental illness or whether you just have a big challenge in your life anyway, the whole theme is about what happens when life knocks you sideways and you have to deal with it. So I talk a lot about the denial I went through. I talk a lot about the sort of crazy things I did, the way it affected my relationships. I've got a whole chapter on what it's like to live without emotions, to not feel. Because fortunately, I'm on a lower dose of lithium now. And so I do have more of an access to my emotional life. It's probably not as rich as it would have been, but so there's lots of like really interesting perspectives. And I talk a lot about bringing love into mental illness, because love is something that is so rarely talked about within science. And science is what sort of drives areas like mental illness and health and things. It's all about research. And yet, because we can't really measure love very easily, yet we all know it exists, and we all know how powerful it is, it's kind of ignored. And so I talk quite a lot about how that could help with the treatment of people and the way we look at ourselves. And yeah, I like the book a lot, and it's getting some great reviews on Amazon. So if you're interested, you can get it on Amazon. Yeah.
Absolutely. So everyone, it's called Befriending Bipolar, a Patient's Perspective. And he also has a second book, The Broker Who Broke Free. So this is also amazing. If I have to ask you, what is the significance of the title and how does it manifest itself in the book?
In The Broker Who Broke Free.
Yeah.
Well, it's my story of basically going from a stressed out city trader to a much more peaceful meditating monk. And I talk a lot about meditation and the way it's helped me and the way it works. So in some ways, it's kind of an introduction to meditation, but it's kind of a fun, sort of humorous story. It's pretty lighthearted. It's Befriending Bipolar is more intense, obviously, because it's about bipolar. But The Broker Who Broke Free is in many ways it's a lot of people's story, because it's about how we're taught to try and find happiness in our life, by arranging our life or by being successful or having a good family or being in love or whatever. And how whilst that happiness can be valid, it's fleeting for most people. Most people, if they get to the top of their career and they look back, they're not that much more happy than they were at the bottom. And we have kids because we think, oh, they're going to make us happy or whatever. And having kids is hard work, and it can provide its own challenges. So I talk a lot about finding happiness within ourselves, and how that long term is a really good strategy.
I love this book, and something definitely I would encourage anyone to read because I started reading I bought it online. The reason I like this book, The Broker Who Broke Free, it's a book that really you free yourself from that liability of the world. It's not necessarily being whatever job you're doing, because we've gone through this pandemic and a lot of people are in that cage or not being able to free themselves and say, okay, how do I find my joy again? And this book talks a lot about joy, how to find that joy again, what to do, step by step guide. And even if you want to still stay where you are, it depends, if it doesn't matter if you're in your job, whatever, you could still find that joy in that environment. So it's such a great, great book. And I'm so glad you took that time out of your busy schedule to write it. So it's really phenomenal. I noticed you're also a wellness coach. I mean, this is so phenomenal, especially with today's world. Now, people have all kinds of things going on in their life, but one of the things we don't know is how to be well within ourselves. And wellness is, for you, it's not just the physical exercise, not just what you eat, it's just the overall wellness. What are some of the pains that you see your clients suffering from today?
A lot of the clients that I speak to at the moment are people who have a friend or a son or a sister with a mental problems, with bipolar usually, and they just want to learn more about it. Because when it comes from someone who's actually got the illness and has found a certain degree of peace with it, then it can be very powerful to talk to people about that. And it can, a lot of things that happen with bipolar is that a lot of things happen when people are ill that are really unpleasant. You know, people might steal things, or they might be very hurtful, or they might be unfaithful, or they might spend loads of the family's money. So a lot of the kind of the aftermath of an episode is really unpleasant for everyone, and particularly for the family and the people close, but also for the person with bipolar, because they also then have to deal with the guilt of what's happened. And so often by just talking things like that through, people can get much more understanding, and it's much easier for them to actually work with their family member and understand them, rather than put up this kind of these barriers that some people feel they have to, because so much stuff has happened.
Yeah.
Um,
It's the barriers can be a typical thing because you don't want to be. I know when I hear about anyone talking about someone with bipolar, the first thing they say is, "I don't want to be affiliated with them. I don't want to deal with those downtime." So having this coaching thing where you actually help clients to understand how to manage them, that also brings me to your own relationship. How do you manage? Because I heard you, you just started by saying I'm married, I have my wife. How do you manage that relationship, especially since you have this emotional pain where you sometimes do not have emotion? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, we've been together for 17 years, so we've been through a lot together. She was with me the whole time when I was coming off lithium, and I mean, she's a saint, basically.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I think there's lots of different ways we do it. I think the fact that we both genuinely love each other and genuinely like each other, so we want the best for each other, and we're both willing to grow. So, for example, at the start of our relationship, we weren't good at communicating at all. It was just one of those sort of passionate relationships, and it was great and whatever. And then suddenly, you know, 6, 9 months down the line, you're faced with actually having to do normal life, and we weren't very good at that. And so we had to learn. You know, we're from different cultures. She's Norwegian and I'm British, and um, so we talk a lot. That's one of the best things. We talk a lot, and I've had to become a lot more humble over the years, and I think she's had to become a lot more sort of open to actually talking about her feelings and how what's going on for her. And we sort of muddled along for a long time, and then more and more, I guess because we found a lot more peace, you know, through meditation and things like that, that we're generally in a better place where we don't react to each other so much negatively, and we can talk. And so it's been an evolution. I wouldn't say there's any sort of magic key to it. Um, but we've had a lot of luck. Like my sister, my sister, my wife, she studies a teacher called Alison Armstrong, who talks about men and women's relationships and how they can work best together. That had a huge impact, you know, for her just to learn that how I work and how to talk to me, and for me to then really just appreciate what she's doing and then want to be nicer to her. I mean, that's been very cool.
Right.
Yeah, so that's been fun.
That's
Yeah,
really
so
go ahead. Yeah.
yeah, well, just different things. So I wouldn't say we haven't got like a magic formula. It's like, oh, we're so wonderful, we did this and that. It's not like that. We just kind of worked at it and been open to help. I do think that's been very important, to actually get outside help, not just try to figure out everything ourselves.
That is really good because I think communication is the key to any relationship. If you want your relationship to go ahead, you better not put things in their mind where they start questioning everything and they start making up stuff that doesn't even exist. Like I think when we started the conversation, one of the things you said, we have people talk about so many problems, but most of these problems don't exist. It's only problems in our head. But when you communicate, you then realize more and more that I'm just making stuff as I go along and I'm making myself unnecessarily unhappy. So get away from those mood swings by communicating. So I'm so glad that this is something you're doing, and I hope everyone who watches this thing communicates more in their relationship. Oliver, before I let you go, does having bipolar have to be in line with your in suffering as an living an unhappy life? Does bipolar lead to an unhappy life, or do you know how to make it? Do people know, because you coach about this now, I know you found your job. Do you know how to make it if you have bipolar to live a happy life? And what does someone need to do now to start on the road to a happy life? If someone wants a happy life, what would they need to do now? Anyone, not just someone with bipolar, it could be anybody. What would you advise?
Well, I would say bipolar affects people very at a very individual level. So I would say that most people with bipolar can create a happy, good life for themselves. I would say so. I'm not going to say everyone in some kind of like ridiculous sort of statement, because there are obviously tragedies in it, and obviously some people kill themselves, and some people it doesn't work out. But in general, I believe that if people ask for help and they get the right help, then they can end up living a really rich life that they can really enjoy. I think it takes, for most people, it takes a lot of patience, because there's very rarely a quick fix. I think the average time to get people on medication that really works for them, a psychiatrist told me, was about 3 years. And they say for the average person to really accept being bipolar, it takes around 10 years. So it's a long-term game. But also knowing that, hearing those words may well mean that you can kind of decide to accept it just hearing it, because you become aware of it. So I don't think it necessarily needs to take a really long time. But for me, the thing I talk about quite a lot in both books actually is the importance of asking for help, because I think that bipolar untreated is extremely destructive, and can often end really badly. Um, and as far as just, everyone, all of us human beings in the world, and what we can do, I mean, again, it's very individual. It depends where we're at in our life, but you can't go wrong with finding something that brings you more peace and joy, and doing more of that. That can't be a bad thing, because the happier you become, the easier everything generally becomes. It's quite magical. It's almost like the world changes around our level of happiness. And when we're depressed, we always stub our toe. um, we always get looked at on the bus by people who we think don't like us, etc., etc. And when we're happy, we just sort of skip through life, and things go our way very often. So I guess that's what I would say.
Absolutely.
What would you say? What would be your advice?
To live a happy life, I think just
Yeah.
be grateful. I think
Yeah.
when you see the world, just be appreciative that you're in it and find your joy by just being grateful rather than making everything a pain. Try and
Mm,
flip the coin and see the
yeah.
positive side in whatever you're looking at. And because someone might be looking at you in a funny way, but you don't know what they're going through, that's making, they might just have had a bad news, they might just have lost their jobs. So when you learn that life is not just always about you, there are other people in this world. And if you, once you start making accommodation for everyone else, then you realize that life is such a beautiful place to be. And you just have to be grateful and keep a happy smile. Just smile wherever you go, because you lift people up and you become more welcoming rather than just being miserable and trying to think that the world's problem is your problem. We've got through the pandemic. We've got through so much which we no one thought we could get through. So when you think that things are so bad, you just have to go back and look at it from a whole holistic perspective and find your joy in that moment. That's how I would say it.
That's wonderful.
I'm so glad you asked me because I mean, I'm all about that holisticness, about finding your joy, being grateful. And I come from that place where I have a chronic illness myself, so I have lived with that pain as well. And that pain taught me that I could either whine about it and say, "Oh my goodness, my life is the worst because I have this," or I could feel the bad days are bad, and I just try and mitigate it. And the good days, I try and make the best of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Oliver, for thank you and taking the time out to speak to me. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thank you.
Yeah, me too. Thank you a million. It's been great. Lovely to meet you.